The day after I arrived back in Santa Monica from Vallejo, I had an appointment at St. John's Medical Center with the surgeon recommended by my doctor. I found the tall, dark, and I suppose some would say handsome Dr. Hutchinson fairly amenable as he explained the procedure of the biopsy to me. He said that I shouldn't eat or drink after midnight the day before the surgery, which was going to be at 3 p.m. on Wednesday of the next week. You know, I've always been blessed with wonderfully supportive friends, and several had offered to accompany me to the hospital. It was Sharon, a new friend I'd met when I worked at Dove Audio, who was kind enough to take me to my medical appointment. She lived in my neighbourhood and had time off work, so I didn't feel it was an inconvenience for her. Because the surgery was mid-afternoon and I hadn't eaten since the night before, I was quite hungry. And Sharon and I talked about where we'd go to eat later. Oh, that's if I wasn't too drugged out from the surgery and was able to eat. I checked in at St. John's, shed my clothes in a cubicle and donned a hospital gown, while Sharon settled in the waiting room with her book. The surgical nurse, who turned out to be Canadian, guided me onto the operating table and asked me to lie flat on my back with my arms straight above my head. She then busied herself preparing for the entrance of Dr. Hutchinson. I told her that I'd be glad when it was all over, so that I could have something to drink and eat, since I hadn't eaten for 16 hours and my mouth felt like sawdust. She was surprised and offered me a drink of orange juice and a cracker. I told her that I'd been instructed not to eat or drink after midnight, to which she responded that the surgery was local and there was no need for anaesthesia. At this point, Dr. Hutchinson arrived, acknowledged the nurse and myself, and set to work on the biopsy. First, he wiped my right breast with a numbing liquid, and then placed a paper cloth the size of a Kleenex over that area, concealing it from my view. After a few minutes, when he obviously thought my breast was numb enough, he made his first incision, and I felt it. It didn't hurt though, so I wasn't too concerned, until he cut deeper into my breast, and I sure as hell felt that. I yelled in pain. "Oh dear, I guess I didn't freeze it enough," Dr. Hutchinson responded. "Do you think?" Now I'm feeling extremely tense and vulnerable, lying with my arms stretched over my head, almost as if I was on a torture rack, as this insensitive surgeon continued to hack away at my breast. Then I felt a tug, and I imagine that's when he removed the lump. Oh, thank goodness that's all over and done with, I thought. But before I had time to expel a sigh of relief, he said, "I'll need to check the margins, which means cutting deeper," he warned. Oh no, did that mean more pain to come? I was not a happy camper and couldn't wait for it to be over. As Dr. Hutchinson traversed the margins of the lump in my breast with the sharp tools of his trade, he made a statement which was the deepest cut of all. He said, "It doesn't look good." I'd been lying outstretched on the operating table or rack for close to an hour and been exposed to unnecessary pain and anguish. I hadn't been prepared to be awake during the surgery and to be aware of every cut of the knife. I'd been given inaccurate information when I was told not to eat or drink after midnight, leading me to believe that I would be having a general anaesthetic. It was all very wrong. Then, for the surgeon to make such a negative statement was not only insensitive, but also completely unprofessional. I was devastated. He continued to probe, and then finally exited my wounded breast and proceeded to close the incision. His manner was very abrupt as he finished his work. What happens next? I asked. Oh, I'll call you with the results on Monday afternoon, the indifferent surgeon replied as he swiftly made his exit. Sore and in shock, I got down off the operating table, drank some more orange juice offered by the Canadian nurse, and made my way to the cubicle to retrieve my clothes. I dressed tentatively, respecting my mutilated right breast, and went into the waiting room where Sharon sat. How did it go? She said. Are you groggy? I explained that I hadn't been knocked out, but had a local. She was very surprised to hear this, and then shocked when she heard the details of my operation. Safely deposited at home after an Italian meal I couldn't stomach, and lots of sympathy from Sharon, I was glad the ordeal was over, and hoping this was the worst it was going to get. I had no doubt that the lump was benign and carried on with my life as usual. On the day I was due to get a telephone call from Dr. Hutchinson with the results of the biopsy, my friend Judy said she would be with me, for which I was very grateful. By 4 p.m, the call hadn't come, so the wonderfully tenacious Judy suggested we call the haughty surgeon's office to get the result. And no sooner said than done. His nurse told me that he would call me back, and he did, no less than 15 minutes later. The news was not what I expected at all. The biopsy revealed that the lump was malignant. It was cancer, stage 2, and measured approximately 2 centimeters. Dr. Hutchinson would be contacting my GP, who in turn would be in touch with me with a referral to an oncologist. And so began the journey. I believe Judy was concerned at my matter-of-fact reaction to the news, an attitude of just get on with it, I suppose. I don't think I cried, which would be the way I dealt with the whole cancer experience, that British stiff upper lip. But more than that, I didn't feel sorry for myself, and I never said, why me? My feeling was, why not me? As far as I was concerned, it was just another life experience. The female oncologist proved to be as haughty as Dr. Hutchinson, and although I have no hesitation in mentioning his real name because of what he put me through, not only during the biopsy but later, I am reluctant to use the oncologist's name. Anyway, she recommended chemotherapy, which would then be followed by radiation. So I also met the radiologist, who was a lovely Japanese man. However, my gut was telling me that I didn't need either, and that I should take the alternative route. Well, you know me, the road less travelled always looked more interesting. Although my oncologist wasn't too persuasive in guiding me towards the chemo route, which in a way convinced me that I really didn't need it, the radiologist did his best to change my mind. But I was determined to remove the cancerous intruder by holistic methods. Because I was due to go back to Vallejo to finish work on the Sphere script, and would probably be there another 3 weeks, I decided to suspend any radical alternative treatments until I returned home. But I did decide to cut out sugar and white flour and to juice my vegetables. A few days later, a pale blue double-stretch limo arrived to take me to LAX for my return to Vallejo. It was always a little weird to have such a huge luxury vehicle take little old me to the airport, and I knew it cost a bundle, one of the many and unnecessary excesses of mover-making. But I have to admit, it felt good to be treated well. Consequently, I had no problem stepping inside this pimpmobile. As I disappeared into the back seat with a uniformed chauffeur somewhere off in the distance behind soundproof glass, I imagined the many antics, some I'm sure quite illegal, that had taken place in this vehicle, all of which had no doubt been witnessed by the stoic and silent drivers, all of whom were sworn to secrecy for fear of losing their jobs. Wow, they must have some stories. But the threat of, "You will never drive in this town again," was perhaps a big enough deterrent not to spill the beans. Although not quite the classy, sleek black limo that usually transported me to the airport, the Vision in powder blue nonetheless gave my neighbours and the airport crowd something to gawk at and wonder about. Was I really someone famous? Next time, my new life and how I got on that TV show I mentioned. Thanks for listening.